Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us at the Target Setting for Long-Term Decarbonisation, a practical challenge for businesses in Hong Kong, webinar organized by Business Environment Council, or BEC. I am Claire from BEC Policy and Research team and your host today. This webinar is supported by BEC's Climate Change Business Forum Advisory Group, representing one of our core environmental focus areas on climate change. Now for a few housekeeping rules. Today's webinar will be recorded, so please feel free to revisit the content when the webinar is later uploaded to BEC's website and our YouTube channel. Participants are all muted by default. If you have any questions or comments for our speakers, please use the Q&A or chat functions at the bottom of your screen, and we will address them during the panel discussion. So without further ado, may I please invite Mr. Simon Ng, Director of Policy and Research of BEC, to give us his opening remarks. Simon, please.
Good afternoon, and thank you for signing up to this webinar on target setting for long-term decarbonisation. Since launch in March 2019, the BEC Low Carbon Charter has become BEC's signatory projects. And we're very pleased to have the support from different organizations and companies. To give you an update about the charter, to date, we already have over 100 companies who've signed up to the charter. The actual figure is 103, and we're very happy because it shows and demonstrates a strong support from companies and also organizations in Hong Kong to decarbonisation, including, the first step being target setting, and that's the reason why we're having a webinar today. BEC actually organized a lot of events to try and support our signatories to decarbonize. In June this year, actually, we organized the first workshop for this year on buildings and green tenancy. And today, we turn our focus on target setting. And we are very pleased to have a few distinguished speakers joining us today. And you will very soon hear from them and their sharing in terms of target setting. Now, before I pass the mic to our first speaker, I would like to express my gratitude to the BEC Climate Change Business Forum Advisory Group, especially the steering committee for supporting the charter since day one. I also want to thank our technical partner CDP, as well as our 8 supporting organizations, including China Real Estate, Chamber of Commerce Hong Kong and International Chapter Limited, Hong Kong Green Building Council, Hong Kong Quality Assurance Agency, SME Sustainability Society, the British Chamber of Commerce in Hong Kong, the Canadian Chamber of Commerce in Hong Kong, the Hong Kong General Chamber of Commerce, and the Hong Kong Liner Shipping Association. Finally, I would like to ask you to sit back and enjoy the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. To kickstart the webinar, please welcome Professor Johnny Chan, Chair Professor of Atmospheric Science and the Director of the Guy Carpenter Asia Pacific Climate Impact Center at City University of Hong Kong, to share with us the latest climate science and its implications to business and the wider community in Hong Kong. Professor Chan, please.
Thank you, Simon, and for the invitation. So he asked me to talk about not just climate change, but the implications on businesses in Hong Kong. So, but I'm sure most of you know a lot about climate change. And so what I would like to focus is climate change in cities rather than the general climate change, because I think that's something that's not being addressed as much as the general climate change worldwide. So the outline of my talk is that what have been the changes in climate in cities. So I'll be focusing on the climate in cities, and in particular, I will focus on 2 aspects. One is the heat waves, and the other one is flooding. Then I'll talk a little bit about what effects of such changes and how they might impact on businesses. And finally, what business can or should do. Right, so this is a chart from the Hong Kong Observatory. And obviously see in here that in 2020, so this is actually from 1884 to 2020. And so you see that in 2020, the number of very hot days, which is obviously defined as the temperature the daytime maximum temperature over 33 degrees. So you see in here that 2020 had the highest number, which is, I think is 47 or 48. So it has been unprecedented. Similarly, for the number of hot nights, which is defined as the minimum temperature, I need to find where my cursor is. Okay, I see it. So minimum temperature greater than 28 degrees. Again, you can see that last year, 2020, had the record number of 50 days, 15 days or 50 nights when the temperature is above 28 degrees. Right, so the heat waves obviously is getting worse and worse in Hong Kong. But obviously, Hong Kong is not alone. And I just show this very, one of the many graphs that people have shown before, that this is in Japan. So the yellow line is Tokyo, the temperature traced in here in yellow. And then if you compare a rural area that's given in the purple line here. So you can see that while both of them are increasing, the rate of increase of temperature in an urban area is a lot higher than that of the rural area. So in other words, cities become very important in terms of controlling the city's high temperature. So obviously, we all know a little bit about this urban heat island, and most people are thinking about, yeah, you have the urban heat island, and where you have the sun heating the buildings, therefore increasing the temperature, and also so that the heat absorbed by the buildings would have the heat emitting from the building surface. At the same time, when you have the sun heating the pavement, then you can heat from the road surface. But there's another very important aspect of urban heat island is what we call the anthropogenic heat in here. So anthropogenic heat means the heat that's generated by urban activities such as air conditioners and heat from vehicles. So all these will then contribute towards not only the increase in the temperature, but there have been studies showing that the increase in the temperature will also lead to a higher chance of heavy rain. Now, the other very important part about urban conditions is the air pollution. And so we all have seen cases like that in which you have polluted area versus that of a clean area in the same city. And there have also been studies, and that's very important, that there have been studies that if you look at the amount of rain, so this is on the bottom axis is the light rain, moderate rain, heavy rain, and extreme rain, okay? And so if you look at the percentage, in polluted air, that's in the blue bars, and then for clean air without much pollution, it's in the red bar. So what you see here is that while in polluted air, the light rain and the moderate rain actually decreases in percentage, while the heavy rain and the extreme rain increases in frequency. So in other words, what you have now is that in addition to the heat effect, the pollution effect will also contribute towards an increase in rainfall, and especially in heavy and extreme rainfall. Okay? All right. So I'll show you, this is my favorite chart from Mr. Mok from the Hong Kong Observatory. So what is plotted in here is the hourly rainfall record at the Hong Kong Observatory. Okay, so they have a very long record. So from 1886, the record was 88.4 millimeters. And this record was kept, it was never broken until 1926, and then it jumped to 100.7. And then it jumped again in 1966 to 108 and 109. And then the last record, the highest record so far, is 145.5 millimeters in 2008. And that actually led to the landslide in Lantau Island, blocking the road to the airport. Obviously, this was not the highest anywhere. So we all heard about the flood in Zhengzhou 2 weeks ago, when the hourly rainfall was 201.9 millimeters. So one possibility is that it could be also due to the urban effect. So with that increase in the rainfall, this is another data from the Hong Kong Observatory that the 1 hour rainfall, so this is what we call the return period of extreme rainfall. For 1 hour rainfall greater than 100, 2 hour rainfall greater than 150, and 3 hour rainfall greater than 200. So in 1900, at the return period, it's roughly about 30 years or so. But then in 2000, it is actually decreased by about 50%. So what you see here is that the return period for 1 hour rainfall with greater than 100 millimeters is actually less than 20 years. So therefore, it's very important that you need to think about the increase in frequency of extreme rainfall. Now, that was this example in Hong Kong. So we also did a study for the Pearl River Delta. As we all know, that Pearl River Delta is a mega city all the way from Hong Kong to Shenzhen to all the way to Guangzhou and also the east and west sides of the Pearl River Delta. So we have looked at the rainfall from 1981 to 2015, and we plotted 4 graphs in here. This is the precipitation amount, so amount of rainfall. And so you see that there's an increasing trend, but it's not very significant, all right? Now, I showed you before about the decrease in the light rain. And in fact, you can see that not only the light rain, but also the rainfall frequency. So how many times it rains in a year, there's actually a decrease, right? So you don't have that many rainfall events, but what you see in the third graph is that the heavy precipitation frequency is increasing very rapidly. Okay, so the heavy precipitation frequency increases very rapidly, and the extreme precipitation also increases, but because of the small number of data points, that this increase is really not that significant. But what's most important is that what you see in here is that the heavy precipitation frequency increases tremendously. All right, so in particular, for tropical cyclones, for typhoons making landfall in South China, we also looked at only the rainfall associated with the landfall of tropical cyclones or typhoons within 2 days of the landfall time. So this is plus or minus 2 days of landfall time. And we looked at the urban stations versus the non-urban stations from 1980 to 2015. So what you see here is that both of them increase, and that's partly because of global warming. But if you look at the difference between the two, it's also increasing. That means in the urban areas you have, so you can also see from here that the urban areas has more rainfall than that of the non-urban areas, right? So you've seen this increase in the temperature and increase in the rainfall. So what I like to do is switch to say, okay, the effects of heat waves and the impact on businesses. So on the left-hand side, I put down some effects. So increase in the heat for heat waves, then you have increase of heat stroke, asthma, respiratory diseases, and mortality. And obviously that impact will be on impacts on insurance, loss of productivity because people are sick. And then very importantly, the second point is about use of energy for cooling. And also very important that if there's a strong demand for electricity, that it could lead to power failure. And these are some of the impacts, including high electricity bill, business interruption due to power failure, which is actually very important for those business with real-time transactions, data storage and transfer, and also for the insurance industry. And obviously poor ESG performance because you need to use a lot more energy. And also because you can have, with power interruption, you can have potential high heat health issues such as inoperative lifts, loss of power in hospitals, and so on. Now, this is not happening very much in Hong Kong, but with the increasing temperature, it could lead to rail buckling, which can break the supply chain and cause traffic interruption. For heavy rain, we all have seen the problems in many places recently. With street flooding, you can have property loss, loss of productivity, potential flooding of power substations, And this is very important. We have seen many cases of underground structures being flooded, and this can lead to property and possible life insurance losses, business interruption, and loss of productivity due to traffic interruption. And then the landslides is loss of productivity and so on. So you can see that obviously this list is not exhaustive, and you can identify many other potential impacts. So what can you do? What can businesses do? For heat waves, I'm just suggesting a few things that within buildings, obviously you need to increase the energy cooling efficiency, recycling of waste heat from the cooling so that it doesn't spill out into the atmosphere, contributing to more anthropogenic heat, use of renewable energy, and reduce the impact of outside heating, which can include shading, low E glass, ventilation, green walls and roofs, and then reduce anthropogenic heat by driving less. And so for heavy rain, this is something that I've been pushing quite a bit, is that you need to install flood barriers for street level property underground structures and check the drains before heavy rain. And then very importantly, install non-electric pumps for emergencies. So as I said, these are some examples of what can be done. And so I would welcome more discussion at the Q&A session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Chen, for setting the scene and explaining climate change and the resultant extreme patterns, as well as implications on businesses. Up next, let's shift our focus to setting decarbonization targets. We have Ms. Violet Chan, Policy and Research Officer at BEC, who will share with us steps for setting decarbonization targets with reference to the 2 BEC executive briefings published in 2019. Let's welcome Violet.
Thank you, Claire. Good afternoon. Today, I'd like to discuss on decarbonization target setting. So my presentation will first cover some background information as to why target setting is important, followed by going through some of the typical steps of target setting. These slides will be shared after the webinar. So why is target setting important for decarbonization? So let's take a look at this diagram extracted from a recent Nature article, which projects the global greenhouse gas emission from 2010 to 2100 on global greenhouse gas emission. Many countries have now set their net zero emission targets around 2050s, 2060s, and 2070s. So as the world, including Hong Kong, are expecting a net zero CO2 emission target by 2050, we would actually need to peak our CO2 emission by 2020, which was last year, to reduce 50% of the emission by 2030, another 50% by 2045 in order to reach the 2050 target. So in translation, on average, that actually means we need to reduce around 5 to 7% of our carbon emission per year. So therefore, target setting here plays a very important role for us to keep track of our progress and also to help us to measure how far are we reaching our milestones. So target setting also brings a number of benefits to businesses. According to a survey conducted by the Science Based Target Initiative in 2018, 52% of the interviewees mentioned that there's a strengthened investor confidence because it demonstrates an industry leadership on the subject matter. Setting a longer term target also helped them in terms of the strategic development. 35% of the interviewees said that there is a resilience built against climate and regulatory changes. Particularly looking at the context of Hong Kong, we have the carbon neutrality target, which we have to respond to, and also the physical impacts that are given by climate change and extreme weather events. 79% of them said that there's an improved brand reputation and competitive advantage. And finally, 63% tell us that it drives innovation and generates some cost saving, which is very profitable for their business. So many of you are our charter signatories, so you would have known about our pathway. So you will be, when you set your targets, you will be either committing to the Paris Agreement and further to the SBTi. But regardless whether you are a pathway to signatories, or if you're not a signatories at all, the SBTi is actually a very useful platform because it provides a lot of information and guidance on target setting. So in particular, they introduced two different target setting approach, the absolute emission contraction and the sectoral decarbonization approach, or the SDA. So today we'll go through the steps of SDA and explain what is it like in a typical target setting process. So SDA is actually suitable regardless which sector you belong to. It covers scope 1 and 2 emissions. It accommodates as absolute and intensity target, which I'll explain these terms in my next slide. So in a typical SDA approach, it started by asking companies to develop a carbon budget. So to put it simply, this budget is actually to help you to understand how much emission you're currently emitting and to calculate how much more you can emit under a given target if you don't want to exceed that. Then based on your budget, you will be able to develop some emission scenarios to project based on your emission trajectory under different conditions as to what happened along with your business development. And lastly, to pick on a scenario that is most suitable and start allocating your emission according to your target, and so that you can meet it on time. So these three approaches or steps can actually be further break down into 9 smaller steps, and we'll go through them one by one. So the first one is to gather support, and I would like to summarize them in 3 things. Firstly, the use of concise language. Knowing that many of the senior management or board members, they may not have the expertise in the subject matter. So translating decarbonization strategies or directions and targets to business languages is extremely important. Something similar to the survey result, which I just covered, would be examples of how you can translate them in business terms. Second is the relevance of climate change to businesses. This is crucial to drive behavioral change and get buy-in, especially from people who do not view climate change as related to their daily work. And lastly, which is actually complement with the relevance, is on engaging across the business units and especially on frontline staff, so that to get them started by making small changes. The second step is to understand and map baseline condition, and that is to collect information of existing emissions. Ideally, according to scope 1, we have direct emission, for example, your exhaust from the vehicles that you're using. Scope 2, indirect emission from the electricity that you consume. And scope 3, any other indirect emissions, for example, along your business value chain, your partners, your vendors, contractors or suppliers, etc. So these baseline information will be very useful because it serves as a reference point as you go back and compare along your decarbonization progress. So the first step is to determine your target scope and boundary. Some would prefer to just cover everything, their entire portfolio, but some other will prefer to cover only specific projects or entity that they're managing. But really, there's no right or wrong answer to this. Fourth step is to choose an approach for target setting. So here we have top-down and bottom-up approach. The top-down approach is actually more relevant for people who would look for setting a very significant target, for example, net zero, before they go downstream and decide what each business unit can do to meet the target. Bottom-up approach, on the other hand, would give you a higher predictability because you start by looking at opportunities for improvement, so you'll be able to understand like how much time or how effective are these opportunities. So the fifth step, to specify on your target metrics, we have absolute target, which is a definitive amount of carbon emission to be reduced over time. So usually we would have this in the unit of CO2 equivalent, or intensity target, a reduction in the ratio of carbon emission relative to another business metric, for example, CO2 equivalent per dollar of revenue, or CO2 equivalent per square feet of office area that you consume or you're currently using. Sixth step, to define a target time frame. So we have baseline, which is your reference point, but also your period with your start and end year to track the duration of your target. So here is how a good decarbonization may look like. We have two examples here. The first example, as you can see in pink, we have absolute 12%. So that is actually an absolute target. The second one saying 30% per unit of value added, that is an intensity target. So both of them have covered the scope, the target metrics, the duration with start and target year, as well as a baseline for comparison. So one question that I often come across as I research on the topic is that whether setting one target is enough and whether you can have one target that will last forever. So very often we have a high level, longer term targets, but they are very much look like a vision. So we need to complement with medium and shorter term targets so that they will be more useful for us to outline with tangible, clearer and specific target, sector specific deliverables so that we can maintain the accountability and track the progress. So second last step is to develop your decarbonization initiative. 4 things to note: your anticipated and actual carbon reduction, your stakeholders involved, whether you need anyone to cooperate with you, your enabling factors and contingency to see whether you need any precondition before you can perform the initiative. And lastly, the time in terms of how much time you need before you can see the return of investment. So the very last step is to track and communicate your progress so that you can engage your stakeholders and let them to decarbonize with you. So as I read through the target progress tracking forms from our signatories, thank you for submitting your forms to us. So there are 5 things that I've observed, especially for signatories who are at their very early stage of decarbonization. But really, there's only one thing that I'd like to highlight here is that target setting and resetting is an ongoing process. It requires continuous measurement, monitoring, and evaluation as we make progress and respond to the changes over time, which is also explains why short, medium, and long-term targets are important and can complement each other. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for committing to set and achieve decarbonization targets with us through the Low Carbon Charter. If you would like to have any support or want to chat about target setting, please let us know and we're always happy to help. Thank you.
Thank you, Violet, and your sharing on decarbonization, space targets, and why is it important. Now, may I invite our next speaker, Ms. Julie Wong, Assistant General Manager of Sustainability NWS Holdings Limited, to share on target setting. Julie, please.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. And I'm very glad to be here to share more of our NWS Holdings, our strategies, sustainability strategies, and our decarbonization target with more people here. Perhaps not everybody is so familiar with NWS Holdings. If I can just get started sharing a short video with you all. Thank you. So very quickly, we gave you a very brief introduction of what NWS Holdings is about. We are actually a subsidiary of the New World Development Company Limited, and we invest in and operate a wide range of business, predominantly in Hong Kong and mainland China. And our core business include toll roads, commercial aircraft leasing, construction, and insurance. And we also manage a strategic portfolio, including logistics and facilities management. Some of them may be more familiar to the audience, like operations with the Hong Kong Convention and Exhibition Center, etc. So a very wide range of business, and it is like we're working with a few companies at the same time on setting their targets. So let's continue just to let you know what our framework is all about, how we have a governance structure set up to enable us to develop a sustainability strategy as well as a decarbonization target. First of all, our sustainability is integrated across our major business units. We have a board, if you can see on the chart, that we have a board of directors that oversees the matters relating to all ESG matters. And through the Sustainability Committee, which is actually chaired by our CEO, And also we have members in there, including our executive directors, non-executive directors, as well as INEDs in the committee. And we have also a set of policies and procedures and guidelines that is developed as part of the group sustainability governance framework. And these policies and guidelines are reviewed and updated regularly by the board and relevant board committees to meet the latest regulatory requirements and where applicable industry best practices. So, and the sustainability committee is also supported by a number of task force and subcommittees which work with our colleagues, business partners, customers, and other local communities to maximize our value creation across our operations. And then we have also all these policies that we have set up, they're actually being audited and reviewed from time to time by our risk management framework as well. And our risk management framework has actually incorporated all our ESG related risk into a wider enterprise risk assessment and the management process. And we also provide, trainings regularly to our employees, suppliers, and also our board members as well. So that's a structure. And now here, I just want to give you a little bit of idea of how our sustainability journey has turned into. We started off quite a while ago, of course, way back when, 2001, we started off with more volunteering, CSR kind of mindset at the beginning. And starting from then, 2006, we have our charity foundation set up that has our volunteering work, our community work developed more systematically. And then in 2007, we have environmental management committee, which started off with our task force focusing with how to manage our environmental impact among our businesses. And as we go on, we can see that in 2014, we have started off our first sustainability report that is officially published. And then 2017, we have our policies established, sustainability policy established. And in 2019, this is exactly when we have our strategy all set up and the group-wide green target set, which I'm going to go through in a little bit later. And things happened after our strategy is established. Actually, we have our first sustainability-linked loan following up, and we combined our annual report and sustainability report into one so that investors, our stakeholders, our shareholders are more aware of not just our financial performance, but our non-financial performance as well. And we have also, in 2021, we're seeing also improved performance ourselves, rated by the external agencies and the benchmarks. So we're quite excited to see that. It's not about, we want better rating or whatever. I think it's more like recognized, and it's also our internal benchmarking as well among ourselves. We're seeing improvements, having a proper framework and having all the targets and performance are properly managed. I think we are not just by ourselves, but is also being recognized by some external agencies. So I think that is quite important. Now it's about the strategy. So as part of our our parent company, the New World Development, we have actually a group-wide New World Sustainability Vision 2030. This 2030, we have taken reference of the UN SDG, and we're focusing on 4 quite key goals that we think we can give them the most impact towards, including good health and wellness, decent work, economic growth, sustainable cities, communities, partnerships with for the goals, etc. And if you look at this right-hand side, here are the 4 pillars of our SV 2030, focusing on green, wellness, caring, and smart. So let me talk a bit more on each one of them. I think for today's presentation, I think we're focusing more on the green aspects here. We're actually looking into moving towards a more greener future. We have set our targets that is to reduce 50% of our carbon emissions using baseline 2013 by 2030. Our main carbon emission coming up from our energy consumption, and thus we have also an ambitious target of reducing 50% of our energy consumption as well, and the water consumption by 30%. And waste, in terms of waste management, the most material waste from our corporation, we're talking about C&D waste, construction and demolition waste. So we're looking for, it is sort of like an annual target of a reuse of over 9% of C&D materials. So this is a very focused to our material impacts, you know, in terms of environment of our entire corporations. So, so having this target set is actually demonstrating our commitment, a long-term commitment towards a low carbon target. We're not exactly, you know, this is not the SBTi target, but we are, we think this is very challenging and is not achievable. It's quite achievable, I would think. And so we'll see how it goes. All right, I won't be getting into the other targets, but we have them all set based on our 4 pillars. We have a roadmap for, as a corporate, looking into climate resilience, reducing environmental impacts and environmental management. How do we have it properly done? How do we do more on the green financing? And also, you know, having these corporate-wide goals set, we have this also moved down to our different business units, having their own roadmap towards our targets. On screen, what you're seeing right now is just only one of them, just to demonstrate, you know, how we push on to the our different business units. This is sustainable construction, a whole lot of initiatives or you know, key focus that they're working on. But I think we can talk a bit more during our discussions, because each one of our business is very different. And so what we have in our targets or the roadmap are quite different as well. Okay, so thank you.
Thank you, Julie, and your concise overview on NWS Holdings Limited's sustainability targets and strategies. This also sets the scene for our next presentation, moving the end from construction to urban design. We are pleased to have Mr. Jasper Hilkhauser, Senior Urban Designer of Innovate ARPAC and Partners Hong Kong Limited, to share with us the challenges and opportunities of target setting. Over to you, Jasper.
Thank you for the introduction, and thanks again for having me. I don't have a video like Julie to show what ARP is all about, but maybe I can give you in a nutshell a bit of a description. So ARP is a global engineering and design firm with about 16,000 people worldwide, covering a lot of different elements in the built environment. So for us, of course, we realize that we also have this important role to play in bringing down carbon emissions, especially as the construction industry is responsible for 40% of them in total. And we feel that as a firm, and maybe also similar to NWS, our alignment with SDGs, it becomes our responsibility to reduce emissions and contribute to the sustainable world. So we also realize that actually the greatest impact we can have is through the projects on which we are the consultant, not the client, but the consultant. So that means if you look at the diagram on screen, our actual control area is fairly small, right? It's just our operations, our offices. But we realize that making an impact here is very important because we want to show that we walk the talk and at the same time also learn the lessons that we can apply those to the projects to work on and help our clients to continue on that journey with us. Now in September 2020, we publicly committed to become a net zero organization by 2030. And maybe what is important to understand, so this is a global commitment. Well, maybe I go to this one already. So this is a global commitment, but it's up to each of our regions to see how to achieve this. So I'm, let's say, responsible for this whole initiative in East Asia. But next to East Asia, there are 4 other regions that need to achieve the same targets. So the key targets for us are 2025, a 30% reduction. And by the year 2030, we aim to be net zero. And this goes along our full value chain emissions. It also means we do realize that at some point, we have to do certified greenhouse gas removal. Now, what I experienced in the time that I'm working on this, and it's from the very beginning, is that I think there's two key challenges. Even though the targets are set, and we followed the science-based targets that you saw on the slide, one of the key challenges we found is actually measuring our carbon emissions. So we are East Asia region, but within the region, we have 15 different offices with very different ways of working and different types of information coming in. So it means the availability of data depends on an office-to-office basis, the consistency of the information that we get, but also the level of accuracy. What you see in the chart on the right is an overview of our 2019-2020 emissions. And what we found, since we try to reduce our emissions across all three different scopes, that for us, scope 3, the purchasing of goods and services and capital goods, that's by far the biggest emitter. So I want to highlight, so employee commuting is fairly small, but also, for example, business travel, which we originally anticipated to be a much higher percentage of the total, is fairly small, which means that a lot of our focus now goes towards scope 3, even though we realize that among the other ones, we also would like to reduce more. I think it was interesting how Violet mentioned that also setting targets helps to innovate. So while originally we're just sending out Excel files across the different offices to get their data, we now are developing a more mature way of how to measure and map and also counter check whether the data is both consistent and accurate. So that's why we're developing a neuron carbon, which fits in, let's say, a series of what we call digital brains to help asset managers, including ourselves, to decarbonize. Now, the second challenge, what I see is actually, even if you know the numbers, how do you reduce your carbon emissions? So the 6 items on the screen here is our global strategy of how we will achieve our first target of having the 30% reductions by 2025. So you see, again, they cover the 3 different scopes. It's about reducing purchasing, commuting, switching to electric vehicles, it's switching to renewable energy, reduction of business travel, but also reduction on goods, especially from our top 20 suppliers. Now, the way we try to achieve all this, and it's a very ambitious agenda. So the first step, actually what I did, this is dating from May 2020, is just engaging our staff. And again, this was mentioned by Violet, how important it is to get the buy-in from everybody that has an influence, whether it's big or small. What we did is we just had a survey among our staff to understand simply what is their view, what ideas do they have to reduce carbon, how important do they think it is, and can they actually help us to execute some of those plans. So one of the first steps after having the survey is that a lot of people, they think, well, we need first to build the capacity and build the awareness. So we launched a carbon action campaign. So this was completed, I think, January this year. And it was really trying to find many different ways to engage as many people as we could. So you can see from the graphic, it became a bit of a gamification. The numbers that indicate the more activities people completed, the higher the chance of winning a prize at the lucky draw at the very end of the campaign. But it really helped. We had 600 of our staff in East Asia participating, and in total completing around 1,500 actions. And it could include joining a workshop, or filling in a survey, or completing a course, doing some readings, or joining one of our SDG cinema screenings. Now, another initiative, and this is being rolled out globally, is that we are applying a carbon levy on all of our flights of $40 per ton of CO2. Now, all that money that goes into the ARP Carbon Fund, and we use that fund to offset our travel at market rates and investing in other efforts to decarbonize. And I think what is important here is that, of course, we can use, say, external vendors to achieve this. But since we are engineers and designers, we're also trying to look at what are the projects we can do. Can we use this fund, for example, on the project that we're working on? And again, create coalitions with our clients to help achieve something on the projects that we do, rather than maybe purchasing a remote forest somewhere in Indonesia, which is less meaningful, we think. Another important step for us, again, and this goes to our main chunk of emissions, is our suppliers of goods and services. So what we now are doing is simply looking at how much money have we been spending on each of the suppliers and scrutinizing how much of them actually have a carbon policy in place. If they don't have a policy in place, can we help them to at least encourage them to think about it and slowly also align their thoughts with what we are doing? And It's difficult, but it's important to really identify those opportunities and really help suppliers on their journey to decarbonize. And again, we're a company of 16,000, so of course, we can make small changes if we all work together and have the same agenda. One question that was often asked, so how has COVID-19 affected our actions and targets? Actually, quite a bit. So we still have to assess the full set of data of our numbers, but we estimate that COVID-19 could have reduced our emissions temporarily at 38%. Now that's a lot, but what we're very mindful about is that even though this sounds like good news in bad times, we shouldn't be celebrating things that might just boost up after a little while, because we know that a lot of the travel bans, for example, that significantly help to achieve this reduction. Once they are banned, probably we need to fly again. Even though we might have the carbon fund in place, it might not help, it might not shoot up again. So we have to be very mindful about what exactly are our own efforts of how we reduce our emissions. So I think there's two main things that we found here. The first one is that working from home actually is much more feasible than we expected beforehand. Even though we're forced to do so, it also helps us to now realign and reshape our business policies. And the second part I want to mention is the use of virtual discussions and meetings, simply taking away the need to travel, which again helps to significantly reduce some of our emissions. So just to sum up, so we feel as a firm, we need to do everything we can within our own operation, but also in our sphere of influence to minimize carbon emissions. And our efforts so far, and I think it's similar to other signatories, it really shows that ambitious climate action and good resilient business go hand in hand. Thank you.
Thank you, Jasper, for the comprehensive presentation on decarbonization strategies and science-based target setting, as well as sharing with us your experiences as to how these strategies are taken in place. Now, let us move on to the panel discussion that will focus on target setting. Again, if you have any questions for our speakers, please feel free to type your questions using the Q&A function. May I please introduce our moderator for today, Mr. Simon Ng, Policy and Research Director of BEC. I'll now pass the time to you, Simon.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you very much for the presentation and sharing. I think you've all provided a lot of information for our audience. But maybe I will start with Johnny. Claire mentioned that this panel will focus on target setting. But I think, Johnny, how you set the scene in terms of the extreme weather condition and how that would affect businesses and, maybe driving them to think carefully about, climate action. And of course, that might affect target setting as well in the long run. Now, if I may ask you, in your presentation, you share a number of ideas in terms of what companies can do to adapt to, all these extreme weather conditions. Do you think companies in Hong Kong are doing enough? Do you think they can do more and how they can do better? Johnny, please.
Obviously, companies can do a lot more than what they have done in every aspect, and some of them I have mentioned about energy savings and to reduce the heating in cities, because you see that the problem is, as I mentioned, that what companies in Hong Kong have done to contribute towards the increase in temperature and increase in the pollution, which then subsequently caused an increase in the temperature and in the heavy rain, it's quite substantial. So therefore, if what companies could do and should do is to try to, as I said, reduce the heat that they put out into the atmosphere and reduce the pollution that they put out into the atmosphere, and to reduce the chance of these impacts on the occurrence of severe weather. Yeah.
Okay, so what you're saying is actually before even thinking about what are the kind of risks they have to take into consideration, maybe another important step is to think about, as you said, how they can reduce the use of energy, the creation of air pollution, because in return that will reduce the impact of their operation on climate as a whole. and that will indirectly have a positive impact in terms of, climate change or global warming, and that might affect the scale of the decarbonization action they need to put together in terms of target setting. Is it?
I think
to interpret?
You need to think about this as a win-win situation.
Mhm.
So yes, you need to put in measures in to reduce your carbon emissions and so on. But at the same time, because of that, you actually get to save money, right? So electricity bill, and if the heavy rain frequency is decreased, then your disaster prevention measures such as flood barriers and whatever, you don't have to spend so much money on it. So there are, business need to think that they're not doing this just because it is the corporate social responsibility type of thing to do, but rather it's actually helping their own businesses. So I think you need to have this change of mindset. It's not just, I need to follow the regulations, so therefore I'm doing it. I'm doing it because it actually helps my company. I think that's what should be the mentality.
Okay, thank you, Johnny. Now, if I may put that point to Julie and Jasper, because you're representatives from our signatories, and obviously you're running very different kind of businesses. But Julie, in your presentation, you talk about your different business streams, operations, and you are making different kind of considerations when you set up your decarbonization target. Can you briefly walk us through what are the key factors that you have to consider, given also what Professor Chan just mentioned about extreme weather condition, and there are other things that you can do to save money in the first place?
I think when we first set the target, I think there's several drivers. I think it's the industry drivers that is moving us, to be more, to demonstrate our commitment towards a low carbon economy. And also, for example, like our parent company, they're also setting very ambitious targets, how we could translate into our business, into our BUs. Our business units, the nature are very different. And I think understanding them, the nature of the business, what's material environmental impact, and what are the relative, carbon impact to the entire company is very important. We have this working on the targets. We have to get them involved. We have to engage them because some is contributing so much more, impact than any other ones. So we really have to work as a group, as a big company, and just highlight, for example, back then when we still have some transport business, for example, we have to understand the lifetime of transport buses and all that. In constructions, we have different things of consideration. So each one of them, we have to really tailor to the nature. And come up with something that we think is workable, and that is also meeting the very challenging targets that for example, that we want to make it to our parent company, to the industry that is looking at it. Is not just a random target, but is something that means something and is worth working towards.
Okay, thank you, Jasper.
Yeah, I think similar points as mentioned just now. I think Frostwolf is very important that we try to really become more than before, actually, the sustainable development consultant of choice. We always talk about being the critical friend or the trusted advisor, these kind of wordings. And we really feel that if we say this out loud, but we don't really walk the talk, as I mentioned in the presentation, we lose our credibility. So for us, it's a must to, at every front that we can, achieve these kind of ambitions. And I think what is equally important is that by doing that, we can also show some of our clients and maybe future clients of, look, we can do it, we can help you achieve it as well. So it's kind of paving the way for what could be a potential additional business stream. And I think a platform like Neurons that we are developing becomes a new service for us. So it feels a bit double sometimes because it's a paradox. We're trying to save the world, but at the same time also save our business. And like I said, at the end, it goes hand in hand.
Okay, thank you, Jasper. Now, I have a follow-up question for you. Now, because OV also sets your own, global target, SBT target. But you talk about, your own operation actually only contribute a very small part of your carbon footprint, whereas you have to work with your business partners, your clients, basically to decarbonize. Now, in terms of target translation, you're talking about a global target that you are working at regional and local levels. Does that provide you with a challenge, and how do you overcome that challenge?
I dare say it's quite challenging, but in a good way, because the targets that are set for us, so the 30% by 2025, that's a top-down approach, as Violet explained. We at that time, which in the beginning was a bit shocking to us. Wow, this is quite extreme and it's very ambitious. Now the good thing is, even though I mentioned the different sub-targets, like we have set 6 different percentages, those are recommendations. How we give shape to that within the different regions, it's up to us. One example is you might remember that there was a target about 100% renewable energy. Now we know in Hong Kong and in actually all of our offices in the region, it's not possible that we can't simply change provider into our offices. So that means we also have to look at what are alternatives. So in this case, we are looking at renewable energy certificates. What is possible and how credible are those to achieve this global target? Okay, thank you, Jasper. I would like to switch to Violet. You've been helping BEC to facilitate the low carbon charter for a while, and you've been receiving returns from the survey from our signatories. Now, what have you learned? What are the observations in terms of, any best practices our signatories are actually having in terms of target setting that you'd like to share with the audience today?
Right. Thank you, Simon. So I think there are a few things that we often come across, like when we look at targets, as I mentioned in my presentation, I think you really need to have all the required information in your targets, because it helps you to find the right information as you report and measure your progress. So for example, you really need to have a time frame to let people and your business partners across your business units to understand how long is your target, how much emission are you covering, your scope, your boundary. So some people would be setting very fake targets. For example, they didn't mention whether that is an absolute or intensity target. So actually, you're making your life a little bit more difficult because you don't know what to collect, the information to collect. So I would say if you want to make your life easier, I think the target is to have specific ones, especially for short-term targets, that would help you to collect your information and to measure. But then another thing to think of is when you think of longer-term targets, for example, something that is beyond 10 years. When I do my research on target setting, I come across a few times that people are thinking about complementing between qualitative and quantitative targets. So you don't really need to fix yourself to have only one target to cover everything that you're operating, but you might want to have some qualitative target to show that you have a vision in the company, and then you have some smaller targets to explain what is that visionary target, which is actually will give you more direction as to what are the things that you can think of when you develop your decarbonization initiatives. So I think these are some things that I have observed from the progress tracking forums. We have companies having a few targets sharing with us, like how are they going to translate in terms of the company level or maybe across their subsidiaries.
Okay, thank you. Violet, actually, there's a question for you from the audience. And I'm sure the other speakers can also respond if you have the answer. Now, what if the business doesn't belong to one of the sectors under SBTi? What should they do? Do you have any advice, or any one of you has come across that? Maybe Jasper, with your working with your clients, maybe you've come across these kind of questions.
I haven't come across it yet, but what I know, so for our global team set our targets. Now, I'm not sure if, for example, Arab would be a direct sector on there. I don't have that level of expertise, but I would assume you just try to find the one that is most closely related. And maybe there's multiple, and then you just cross-check what are the elements on each one. That will be my initial reply.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. Any other response?
Well, I think even if you're not covered within the SBTi scope for target setting, I think the information or the guidance provided by SBTi is still something that you can reference to, because as I described the sectoral decarbonization approach, the approach itself is actually suitable for any sector. It gives you the idea is that it gives you a guideline, a step-by-step guideline in terms of what is it like when you set target, what are the typical process that you need to go through. So I think target setting itself doesn't have a limit for sector, but if you're looking into further like the SBTi, then that is something that you should consider. But if you're taking the first step, then I would suggest referencing their materials first.
Okay, thank you, Violet. I have a couple of questions actually for Julie about NWS. What's the boundaries of your target? Are there any parts of your businesses that's being excluded from the target setting process right now? So that's the first question. The second question is, you have demonstrated you already have an intensity target for carbon reduction. Have you considered, in the future, maybe absolute reduction target? And do you think the absolute target actually will go down while you're expecting, more growth in your company? Very interesting questions.
Yes. Okay. The first one is about
The scope of your target.
the scope of what?
Boundaries.
Okay, right. Like you said, we have a very wide range of business, and I think for corporates like ourselves, it's actually we don't have all of them included, I have to say. But if you included all the most major ones, those that we have full control over, and they actually covers to a majority of our revenues, like close to maybe like 90% and above. And so that is sort of like our coverage. And we focuses on those that we have full controls, because many of our business may not, be 100% like owned by us. So we may not necessarily have the say of everything. So we have to strike a balance. Not that we don't work on them, we're doing sustainability, on those companies as well. It's just that we may not have a target that have them included as yet. So it's a journey, I think. We currently don't have it, but it doesn't eliminate us from, including them potentially maybe in the future. But for now, that's what we have.
Okay.
And about the absolute emissions, we don't have a target yet, but we do monitor them closely. Right now, I think, because our business right now, I think it's quite interesting. Our business, the better we're doing with the business, actual emissions are expected to go up, really. And some of them, I think, for example, if you think of construction, I think the more projects we have, of course, we will have more carbon emission, for example. But of course, it doesn't mean if we don't convert them into an intensity, that people won't be seeing, whether we're doing better or not, because we are just expanding the quantity of our projects. So it may not give people a best picture, and including also is we have a very wide range of business. It's important and it's helpful to have a target that could better represent us as a whole, as a company. So an intensity target may be more representative, but of course we disclose and monitor our absolute emissions as well, so that people or our readers can tell, how well or how not well that we're doing. We're more transparent in that sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Julie. Now we have 7 minutes to go. I would like to encourage our participants, since you are listening and maybe some of you are setting your targets, encountering some problems. If you have anything to ask, we have a panel of experts to help you here. So please type your comments or questions in the Q&A box before we are running out of time. Now, Johnny, this year we have COP26, and of course last year Hong Kong announced the carbon neutrality target by 2050. Now we all have to do our bits, and businesses, they have to do their own job as well. Do you have any expectation for the business sector moving forward in terms of accelerating the climate action? Now, if they are willing to commit, then do you have any word of advice to them So this is my first question. Second question, just out of curiosity, whether universities like City University, have any discussion about, decarbonization? Will you consider also setting the target?
I think Hong Kong businesses are moving in that direction, but it will have to really come from every sector of society. So obviously the government has put out this plan, but I remember last year you had a seminar, and I made this remark that I don't think it's possible, if you recall. And I'm not saying this as a criticism, but it's really, to me, setting a target of carbon neutrality in Hong Kong is very difficult, simply because the many businesses, I mean, you have people signing up to your low carbon charter, but there are lots of businesses that really do not see this as their priority. So what needs to be done is to convince businesses, small and large, that this is something that they need to do. As I said, it's a win-win situation. So you can't just say that, okay, well, you do it because there's a regulation that you need to do it. So we need to have more efforts to convince businesses to do this sort of thing to help themselves. So I think that's something that needs to be done. In terms of universities, I am not aware of a concerted effort among the universities. Now, individual universities might be doing something, and I think each university is doing something, but I don't think there's a concerted effort in the university sector as a whole to really help decarbonize. And one of the problems, I think, is because of the mentality, and it's not just the universities, but the public sector or the semi-public sector, in the sense that they are not aware that this is something that they should do. So I'll give you a very simple example is that you ask people in government buildings, right? Or even in universities, how many of them would switch their lights off when they leave the room? And how many of them would always switch off their computer when they leave? And the reason is very simple. They said, that's not my electricity bill. Why should I care? And things like, photocopying on one-sided paper, and instead of doing paperless communication and so on. So these are, you need to change the mentality of people before that may be actually possible, I think.
Okay, well, thank you, Johnny. I think on your first point, it kind of reminded us that actually that's the reason why initiatives like Low Carbon Charter has to continue, because, as a signatory, actually, if I may remind all the signatories, one of your obligation or commitment is to share the news and invite and inspire people around you, including your business partner, to do the same. So I think hopefully starting with 1 or 2 companies and then now with 100, and as we grow, we bring in more companies and organizations to join this event and initiative. And on your second point, Johnny, maybe that's something you might consider, taking a lead and try to convene, your counterparts in various universities, given your status and your experience, to, tell them you have to do something together.
All right.
Thank you for homework. Now, we only have 2 more minutes, so maybe I don't have any other questions. So I will give each one of you maybe 30 seconds to just say a few words to encourage maybe a small piece of advice to our signatories as they are, as I said, going to set the targets. Jasper, can I start with you?
Yes. So my advice would be that you have to be very aware of what exactly are you talking about. What is meant by carbon emissions? And it means you have to be very transparent, but also very realistic about what your targets are. Because what I've seen happening is that a lot of companies, they might say, okay, we're going to reduce only scope 1 and 2. How about scope 3? And similarly, so you can always offset, but offset is not helping, it's not solving the problem. It's really about reducing your own energy footprint. And I think it resonates what the professor said before. It really starts with mitigation. It's not adaptation, it's mitigation. It's stopping the problem first and then trying to deal with the consequences.
Thank you, Julie.
We do really support the setting up the targets, whether it is so ambitious like the SBTi or something different. But I think we're definitely seeing the positive impact of having the target set. I think it gets our colleagues, our peers, seeing what we're committed to, and it is so much easier for us to do better. I mean, we could just because we have a target, that's why we have to come up with a roadmap to really move forward. And we're seeing a lot more opportunities like green finance. We're doing better in our performance as rated by external peers or something like that. And so I think that is quite positive. But I think also I want to remind everybody that when we're doing the target setting, monitoring of our data, real understanding, the accuracy of our data, robustness of our data integrity is also very important. And you really need a good history and a good data set in order for you to set the right target for yourself, especially like under COVID these days, because what you see right now may not be a norm, but you have to be really aware of what you're anticipating and what you could be expecting in the future. So don't overshoot it or do it.
Thank you, Julie. Johnny?
I think what needs to be done is to 2 points. One is we need to reiterate that this is a win-win situation. But maybe what BEC can do is actually to identify a few of the companies that can have their action being a demonstration as to how the actions actually turn into money saving. I mean, after all, they all look at the bottom line, right? So if you can have a few demonstration projects or few demonstration activities that actually show that by doing such activities, you are actually saving money in the long run. So that could convince more people to join in, to participate, and to expand the network to, especially for SMEs, for example.
Okay, yes, we promise you. We'll do that. And
Okay.
valid.
So for me, I think the purpose of target setting is to actually achieve them. So when we look for target setting, don't be afraid or thinking that your small target will not make a difference. I think any small changes are still good changes. So start by doing something that is measurable and achievable, and go step by step and make your progress. And I'm sure you're going to achieve a lot along your journey.
Thank you, Valid. So time is running out. To close, I just want to say today we only covered a small part of the whole target setting exercise and experience. I think Julie and Jasper, you talk about communications, you talk about tracking, reporting, those are also very important. And Johnny, your last point about, BEC, can we identify and put together some examples, especially on, cost saving? Actually, just, a heads up, we are preparing our next progress report, Low Carbon Charter progress report for year 2020, and it will be ready in the first half of September. And in that report, we will include some case studies. So we'll make sure that, the cost saving elements will be included as well. So with that, please give a big hand to our speakers. Thank you very much for joining us. And I'd like to hand it back to Claire with some final housekeeping messages. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Simon and our panelists for moderating the discussion. This also concludes the webinar. An event feedback questionnaire will be sent to you after the webinar. Please take a few moments to fill in the form. If you are interested to know more about future BEC events, please follow our social media channels. Thank you again for joining us and have a nice day.